Hey there, fellow bookworms. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a novel that sparked, some pretty heated discussions.
Mm-hmm.
Markus Zusak's The Book Thief. We're going beyond the basic plot and diving into a treasure trove of reader reviews from Goodreads.
Okay.
Why? Because I think it's fascinating how a single book can resonate so differently with people.
Right.
What makes some readers weep while others are left completely cold? Let's find out.
What's immediately intriguing about The Book Thief is Zusak's choice of narrator, death. Not a metaphorical representation, but death personified.
Yeah.
Walking us through the story, this bold choice alone might explain why people have such strong reactions.
Okay, I have to admit, death as a narrator is a bit unsettling. Zusak has death saying things like, "Personally, I quite like that," such stupid gallantry.
Mm.
And then a few pages later, "I do not carry a sickle or a scythe."
Yeah,
It definitely sets a unique tone.
absolutely. Some reviewers embraced this unusual perspective. For example, Maja, a reviewer on Goodreads, found Death's unique perspective and occasional dark humor incredibly insightful. She felt it added a layer of meaning that a human narrator just couldn't capture.
Right.
But then you have readers like Sophia who found it distracting and gimmicky.
Yeah.
They wanted to focus on the characters and the story and felt Death's interjections took away from that.
So right off the bat, we see this split in reactions. It's almost like this one creative choice becomes a litmus test for how you'll experience the entire book.
Right.
But of course, there's more to it than that. What about Liesel, the book thief herself?
All right.
She's at the heart of this story. A young girl in Nazi Germany who finds solace and connection in the written word.
Liesel's journey as a book thief is another aspect that divides readers. It all begins with her stealing the gravedigger's handbook at her brother's graveside. It's an act born from grief, but it sends her on a path where books become much more than just words on paper.
Right.
We need to remember, this is Nazi Germany. Books are being burned, words are being twisted for propaganda. Yeah. So Liesel's acts of stealing and reading become quietly defiant.
It's like she's reclaiming the power of words.
Right.
In a world where language is being used to spread hate and fear, she finds refuge in stories, even those that seem mundane, like a gravedigger's manual.
Right.
It speaks to how desperate she is for connection and escape.
Exactly. And it sets up this really powerful theme that runs throughout the book, the duality of words.
Uh-huh.
On the one hand, you have Hitler's rhetoric, which Zusak describes through a reviewer's words. Hitler told the German people how to think.
Wow.
Words are being used to manipulate and control. But then you have Liesel, who finds solace and strength in books and writing, demonstrating the power of words to console and inspire.
It makes you wonder, what would have become of Liesel without books? Yeah. It's like they literally saved her soul in this brutal, dehumanizing environment.
Yeah.
It also makes me think about how we use language today. Mm-hmm. Do we allow ourselves to be manipulated by powerful rhetoric? Or do we actively seek out stories that nourish our hearts and minds? I mean, it's heady stuff.
It absolutely is. And that's part of what makes The Book Thief so compelling. It tackles these weighty themes in a way that's both accessible and thought-provoking.
Right.
But of course, it's not just about big ideas. It's also about the characters that bring those ideas to life.
You're right. And the characters are another area where reader reactions really diverge.
Mm.
Let's start with Hans Huberman, Liesel's foster father, the one who teaches her to read. He's this incredibly kind, gentle soul in the midst of so much darkness.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't love a man who plays the accordion?
Right.
But even with Hans, there's this complexity. He's a member of the Nazi party, yet he risks everything to hide Max, Jewish man, in his basement.
That complexity, that internal struggle is what makes Hans such a fascinating character.
Right.
He's a product of his time, but he also possesses a deep well of compassion and courage. And then you have Rosa Huberman, Liesel's foster mother, who on the surface seems harsh and unforgiving.
Oh, Rosa. She's a force of nature. One reviewer perfectly captured her, saying, "Make no mistake, the woman had a heart. She had a bigger one than people would think. There was a lot in it, stored up, high in miles of hidden shelving."
Yeah.
She might yell and grumble, but underneath it all, she's deeply loving and protective.
Precisely. And it's that contrast, that rough exterior hiding a tender heart, that makes Rosa such a memorable character.
Right.
She subverts our expectations, reminding us that things aren't always what they seem.
And then there's Rudy Steiner, Lisa's best friend. He's this mischievous little boy with hair the color of lemons, always up for an adventure.
Mm.
His loyalty to Liesel is unwavering, and their relationship provides a much-needed spark of joy amidst the bleakness.
Mm.
But even Rudy's story takes on a tragic dimension as the war unfolds.
Yes, and it's through characters like Rudy that Zusak reminds us of the innocence lost in war. Rudy represents the hope and optimism of youth, which is ultimately crushed by the brutality of the Nazi regime.
It's just heartbreaking to think about what could have been for these characters if not for the war. And speaking of heartbreaking, we can't forget Max Vandenberg, the Jewish fistfighter the Hubermans hide in their basement.
Right.
His presence adds another layer of tension and danger to the story, and his relationship with Liesel is both tender and profound.
Reviewers really connected with the hidden world Liesel and Max create in the basement, sharing stories and finding solace in each other's company.
Yeah.
It highlights the power of human connection, even in the most dire of circumstances. But even the most fleeting moments of beauty are overshadowed by the constant threat of discovery.
Right.
One reviewer vividly described a Nazi official as, "He was more a black suit than a man. His face was a mustache," perfectly capturing the dehumanizing nature of the regime.
And that's the genius of Zusak's writing, right? He uses these incredibly evocative descriptions to pull us into the story, to make us feel like we're right there on Himmelstraight, experiencing both the beauty and the terror alongside these characters.
Yeah.
He also uses vivid imagery to create a sense of place.
Yeah.
A reviewer remarked, "The town that afternoon was covered in a yellow mist, which stroked the rooftops as if they were pets." It's almost like the town itself becomes a character in the story.
Absolutely. But the question is, did the reviewers find this effective?
Right.
Did they buy into Zusak's craft?
Well, some absolutely adored his writing style, but others, not so much.
Right. It's here that we see another divide in reader responses. Zusak's writing style.
That's a great point. Let's dig into that more after a quick break. All right, so we've talked about the unusual narrator, the compelling protagonist, and the vivid characters that populate the book thief.
Right.
But as you mentioned, Zusak's writing style itself is something that readers either love or hate.
Exactly. Some reviewers, like Shannon, praised his use of imagery and metaphor, calling his prose poetic and emotionally rich. They felt it elevated the story, added layers of meaning.
Yeah.
But others, like Emily May, found the language distracting and even laughable at times.
Oh, wow.
They felt it was overwrought, trying too hard to be literary.
It's interesting because I can see both sides. There are moments where his metaphors are stunning, like when he describes the sky during a bombing raid.
Right.
But then there are times when it feels a bit heavy-handed, like he's trying to force a profound moment.
That's a really astute observation, and it speaks to a broader debate about writing styles.
Wow.
Is it better to be subtle or direct, to trust the reader to make connections, or to spell everything out for them?
It's like that age-old question, show, don't tell. But even within that principle, there's a spectrum. Some writers excel at subtle implication, while others are masters of vivid description.
Right.
It's all about finding the right balance, I suppose.
And that balance is often subjective. What one reader finds beautiful and evocative, another might find pretentious and annoying. There's no right or wrong answer, just different preferences.
It's like music. Some people love the complexity of a symphony, while others prefer a simple, catchy tune.
Right.
Both are valid forms of musical expression. They just appeal to different sensibilities.
Exactly. And that brings us to another aspect of Zusak's style that some readers found challenging.
Right.
The episodic structure.
Okay.
The book thief unfolds through a series of vignettes, like snapshots of Liesel's life in Nazi Germany.
It's not a traditional linear narrative, is it? It's more like a mosaic, with each piece contributing to the overall picture.
Precisely. Some reviewers found this structure incredibly immersive. It allowed them to savor the details, to connect with the characters on a deeper level.
Right.
It's like sinking into a comfy armchair by the fire. You're not in a rush. You're there for the slow burn, the quiet moments, as much as the big plot twists.
I can see how that would appeal to some readers. It allows you to really inhabit the world of the story, to experience it at a more leisurely pace.
Right.
But of course, not everyone enjoys that kind of slow burn.
Right. For some readers, that same episodic approach can feel meandering, lacking the kind of urgency or plot-driven momentum they crave.
Yeah.
They might appreciate the writing, the characters, even the emotional depth, but still find themselves wishing things would move along a bit faster.
So it comes down to individual reading styles and preferences.
Yeah.
What hooks you? What keeps you turning the page? Is it the intricate detail, the emotional roller coaster, or the need for a fast-paced plot? It's fascinating how these individual preferences shape our experience of a book.
Absolutely. And this ties back to something we discussed earlier, death as a narrator.
Right.
Some reviewers, like Michael, found it distracting and unnecessary. They argued that it didn't add anything to the story, that a human narrator would have been just as effective.
But others felt that death's perspective, particularly his foreshadowing, actually heightened the tension and dread. It's like knowing a storm is coming. You can see the clouds gathering, feel the wind picking up, and that anticipation, that knowledge of what's to come, could be more unsettling than the storm itself.
Exactly. And for some readers, like Colleen, that unsettling feeling added to the emotional impact of the story.
Right.
It made the stakes feel higher. The loss is more profound.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these elements, the narrator, the structure, the writing style, they all work together to create a very specific reading experience.
Right.
And depending on your individual preferences, you're either going to be drawn in or pushed away.
That's a great point. It's not just about the individual elements themselves, but how they interact and contribute to the overall effect.
Speaking of effects, we can't talk about The Book Thief without discussing its emotional impact. This is a book that doesn't shy away from difficult topics. It tackles loss, grief, war, and the very nature of humanity in the face of unimaginable cruelty. So it's not surprising that reviewers had very strong reactions.
Absolutely. Some were deeply moved, calling it heartbreaking and soul-shattering.
Yeah.
They felt that Zusak handled these sensitive topics with grace and sensitivity, creating a story that was both emotionally resonant and thought-provoking.
Like Whitney, who said she sobbed so hard while reading that she actually had to put the book down several times.
Yeah.
It clearly struck a deep emotional chord.
But then you have reviewers like Lisa who, while acknowledging the emotional weight of the story, felt that the pacing, especially in the middle section, dragged a bit. She appreciated the emotional depth, but wished things had moved along a bit faster.
It's that episodic structure again, isn't it? For some, it allows for a deeper emotional immersion.
Right.
For others, it feels like it slows down the momentum of the story. And of course, there are those who felt that Zusak's attempts at emotional manipulation were, well, manipulative.
Right. Reviewers like La Petite Américaine found the whole thing to be expensive toilet paper, accusing Zusak of trivializing the Holocaust by trying to force an emotional response.
So even the emotional impact of the book is subjective, depending on how you connect with Zusak's writing style and narrative choices. It's fascinating how one book can elicit such a wide range of responses.
It really is, and that brings us to the ending, which, without giving anything away, is another point of contention. Some found it devastating, others felt it was necessary.
I'm dying to know your thoughts on the ending, but I know we can't spoil it for those who haven't read the book.
Right. Let's just say it's an ending that doesn't offer easy answers or neat resolutions. It forces us to confront the harsh realities of the world Zusak has created and to grapple with the complexities of human nature in the face of unimaginable circumstances.
And maybe that's the point, right? To leave us with questions, with a sense of unease, rather than providing a tidy, feel-good resolution.
Perhaps. But one thing is for sure, The Book Thief is a book that stays with you long after you've finished reading. It sparks conversation, challenges our assumptions, and forces us to confront our own values and beliefs.
And that's ultimately what we're looking for in a good book, isn't it? Something that makes us think, that makes us feel, that stays with us long after we've turned the last page.
Absolutely. And in that sense, The Book Thief certainly succeeds. It's a book that has sparked passionate responses from readers around the world and continues to generate debate and discussion years after its publication.
Now, you mentioned that some reviewers had issues with the way the book was written. Could you expand on that a bit? What specifically did they find frustrating?
One common complaint was Zusak's frequent use of bold, centered text, almost like little news flashes interrupting the flow of the narrative.
Okay.
Some felt it was heavy-handed, as if Zusak didn't trust the reader to grasp the significance of certain moments without hitting them over the head with it.
So it's that question of subtlety versus directness again. Some readers want to be gently led to a conclusion, while others prefer the author to just come right out and say it.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of tone. Some readers found Death's voice to be too whimsical or flippant, given the gravity of the subject matter.
Right.
They felt it undermined the seriousness of the story, creating a jarring dissonance between the horrors of war and the narrator's casual observations.
That's an interesting point. It's almost like there's a disconnect between the content and the voice telling the story. Did any reviewers offer insights into why Zusak might have made that choice?
Some speculated that it was a way to make the story more accessible to younger readers, or perhaps to provide a sense of relief from the darkness of the subject matter.
Okay.
Others felt it was simply a stylistic choice that didn't quite work.
So even within the realm of death as a narrator, there are differing opinions on how effectively Zusak pulls it off.
Exactly. And this is where diving into reader reactions becomes so valuable. It allows us to see the multitude of perspectives, to understand how the same elements can be interpreted in such different ways. It's a reminder that there is no single correct reading of a book.
Right.
Each reader brings their own experiences, biases, and preferences to the text, and that shapes their interpretation.
It's like having a book club discussion with thousands of people, each bringing their own unique insights to the table.
Yeah.
You might not always agree, but you're guaranteed to walk away with a richer understanding of the book, and maybe even of yourself.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do here.
Right.
To explore the book from multiple angles, to understand why it resonates so powerfully with some, while others are left cold.
It sounds like The Book Thief is one of those books that you either love or hate, but either way, you're engaging with it on a deep, personal level.
Precisely. It's not a book that leaves you indifferent. It provokes strong emotions, sparks debate, and ultimately makes us think more critically about the world around us.
Now, if we look back at the book as a whole, what strikes you as the most significant takeaway from these reviews? What common threads emerge despite the differing opinions?
I think it's the reminder that even in the darkest of times, stories have the power to connect us, console us, and inspire us. Liesel's love of books becomes her shield against the horrors of war, her way of finding meaning and beauty in a world that's falling apart.
Yeah.
And that's a message that resonates across cultures and time periods.
And the power of words, right? Not just to manipulate and control as Hitler did, but to offer solace, hope, and even resistance. And it makes you think about the stories we turn to in our own lives, the ones that sustain us, challenge us, and help us make sense of the world.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder, what stories do our listeners turn to for solace and understanding in challenging times? What books have touched your heart and shaped your worldview?
That's a great question. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your favorite books and what they mean to you on our social media channels. We're all about creating a community of book lovers who can connect and share their passions.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more aspect of The Book Thief that I think is worth highlighting.
Okay.
It's exploration of good and evil and the complexities of human nature, especially in times of war.
That's definitely a recurring theme throughout the book. We see it in Hans's decision to hide Max, in Rose's gruff exterior hiding a tender heart, and in the many acts of kindness and cruelty that unfold against the backdrop of war. It's not a black and white world, is it?
Not at all. Zusak avoids easy answers or simplistic portrayals. He presents us with characters who are both flawed and heroic, capable of both great love and unimaginable cruelty.
Right.
And he forces us to confront those contradictions within ourselves.
It's like he's saying that even in the most extreme circumstances, there's always a flicker of humanity, a capacity for both good and evil that resides within us all.
Exactly. And that's a profound and unsettling thought, isn't it? It challenges our assumptions about heroism and villainy and forces us to grapple with the complexities of human nature.
It's a lot to process, for sure. But I think that's what makes The Book Thief such a powerful and enduring work of literature.
I couldn't agree more. It's a book that stays with you, that makes you think, that challenges you on a deeply personal level. And that's what great literature should do.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to say about The Book Thief without actually spoiling the ending. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on the book.
I think The Book Thief is a masterclass in storytelling.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't work for every reader, it's a testament to the power of words, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring importance of stories in our lives.
Right.
It's a book that will stay with you long after you finished reading, prompting you to re-examine your own values and beliefs, and perhaps even to seek out those stories that offer solace and understanding in your own life.
It feels like we could talk about this book for hours, unpacking every detail and debating every creative choice. But I think what really sticks with me after exploring all these different reactions is how Zusak uses death as a framing device for a story about life.
That's a brilliant observation. It's almost paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah.
Death, the ultimate end, narrating a tale about the preciousness of life, the power of human connection, the enduring strength of the human spirit.
It's like he's saying that even in the face of death, life finds a way to persevere. That even in the midst of war and destruction, there's beauty, there's love, there's hope. And those things, those fleeting moments of grace, are worth fighting for, worth cherishing.
And that even death, in all his omniscience and inevitability, is touched by the stories of these ordinary people living extraordinary lives. Remember that line, I am haunted by humans. It suggests that even death can't help but be moved by the resilience, the compassion, the sheer tenacity of the human spirit.
It gives me chills just thinking about it. It's like Zusak is challenging us to find those moments of grace in our own lives, even when surrounded by darkness, to appreciate the fleeting beauty of everyday moments, the connections we forge with others, the stories that shape who we are.
And to recognize the power of words, not just to wound and destroy, but to heal, to inspire, to connect us across time and space.
So what would you say to someone who's hesitant to pick up The Book Thief because they're worried it'll be too depressing or emotionally draining?
I'd say yes, it's a challenging book. It deals with difficult subjects and it doesn't shy away from the brutality of war. But it's also a book filled with moments of beauty, humor, and profound love.
Right.
It's a testament to the power of the human spirit to persevere even in the face of unimaginable suffering. And it's a story that will stay with you long after you've turned the last page, prompting you to reflect on your own life, your own values, and the stories that shape who you are.
So it's a book that asks a lot of its readers. It's not a passive read. You have to be willing to engage with the tough questions it raises, to sit with the discomfort it might evoke.
Exactly. But for those who are willing to take that journey, The Book Thief offers a profound and ultimately rewarding reading experience.
Well, I think we've done our best to unpack this complex and thought-provoking novel. We've explored the diverse reactions it has sparked, from those who found it deeply moving to those who were left cold. We've delved into the symbolism, the literary techniques, and the historical context that shaped the story. And most importantly, we've invited our listeners to consider how this book speaks to the power of stories, the complexities of human nature, and the enduring importance of finding meaning and connection in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought. What stories do you turn to for solace and understanding in challenging times? What books have touched your heart and shaped your worldview? We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts on our social media channels, and let's continue this conversation together.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Markus Zusak's The Book Thief. Thanks for joining us on this journey of literary exploration. Until next time, happy reading.